That is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
Oil prices are on the rise again, and this time, it's not just about supply and demand. A combination of falling U.S. crude inventories, increased geopolitical pressure, and the threat of more U.S. sanctions is creating turbulence across global energy markets. What's unfolding is a complex picture that blends policy, economics, and international politics. And it's already pushing oil prices to their highest level in nearly a month. According to government data released this week, U.S. crude oil and fuel inventories dropped significantly more than expected. This news alone would typically be enough to cause prices to move, but the timing of this data comes as the United States intensifies its pressure on countries importing oil from Venezuela and Iran. President Donald Trump has issued a new executive order that authorizes 25% tariffs on any country that continues to buy oil from Venezuela. And it's not just a threat. Traders are already reacting. The figures from the U.S. Energy Information Administration show that crude inventories fell by 3.3 million barrels last week, bringing the total down to around 433.6 million barrels. That's more than 3 times the draw analysts had predicted. Gasoline and distillate stocks also declined, indicating strong demand or reduced supply, or both. While the drop in inventories is certainly a factor, markets have their eyes on something bigger: the potential consequences of Trump's latest tariff decisions. On Monday, he signed off on a blanket 25% tariff for all imports from any nation that continues buying Venezuelan oil or liquid fuels. This move, paired with earlier sanctions on Iranian oil exports, is starting to have real effects. On Tuesday, reports showed that trade in Venezuelan oil to China, Venezuela's largest customer, had stalled. Chinese refiners are now waiting for signals from Beijing, unsure whether they'll be instructed to stop buying altogether or find workarounds. These are not small deals we're talking about. Oil is Venezuela's main export, and the country depends on those sales to keep its fragile economy afloat. According to analysts at Barclays, this could have serious consequences for Venezuela. If the U.S. tariffs discourage enough buyers, the country could be forced to shut down up to 400,000 barrels per day in oil production. That would be more than half of Venezuela's total exports. Economically, it could translate into a loss of nearly $5 billion, or over 10% of the nation's entire GDP. It's not just Venezuela feeling the heat. The U.S. has also imposed new sanctions on Iran, targeting specific entities and vessels that have helped move oil to Chinese refiners. One of the companies named is Shuguang Luqing Petrochemical, a refinery based in China's Shandong province. These added restrictions mean that even nations trying to continue trading with Iran are finding it harder to do so. Analyst Ashley Kelty from Panmure Liberum noted that the physical oil markets are tightening as flows shift due to these restrictions. In other words, oil that was once heading to China or India from Venezuela and Iran may now have no clear destination. That's making it harder to predict supply and putting upward pressure on prices. Amid this instability, OPEC Plus is reportedly considering an increase in production to compensate for the potential loss of up to 1.5 million barrels per day from Iranian exports. Jorge Leon from Rystad Energy suggested that producers may be quietly preparing to ramp up output to prevent a major global price shock, especially if Venezuelan and Iranian barrels are taken off the table all at once. Despite these efforts, prices have already started climbing. Brent crude, the international benchmark, was trading just under $74 per barrel, the highest since late February. U.S. West Texas Intermediate, or WTI, was just below $70. These numbers might not seem extreme at first glance, but in the world of oil, movements like this are closely watched and can have ripple effects across industries. The price rises come at an awkward time. Economists have been warning that Trump's broader tariff strategy, aimed not just at Venezuela and Iran, but also at countries like China, Mexico, and India, could slow global economic growth. If the cost of energy goes up while demand for goods slows down due to tariffs, we may find ourselves in a more fragile economic situation than expected. There's one potential source of relief, albeit temporary. The United States recently helped broker a deal between Ukraine and Russia to pause attacks at sea and avoid strikes on energy infrastructure. The agreement is still being viewed with skepticism on both sides, but if it holds, it could reduce the risk of another spike in prices caused by conflict in Europe. For now, though, energy markets are dealing with what looks like a deliberate tightening of the system, driven largely by U.S. foreign and trade policy. The logic behind the tariffs, according to the Trump administration, is to punish authoritarian regimes and reshape global trade. But this approach also creates uncertainty. And in energy markets, uncertainty often equals volatility. Trump's decision to weaponize tariffs isn't new, but its use in the oil sector takes things to another level. Rather than just targeting the countries producing the oil, this new move hits anyone buying it. That includes allies and trading partners who now have to decide whether continuing their oil deals with Venezuela or Iran is worth the added cost. What makes this even more complicated is the lack of clarity around exemptions. Some countries are reportedly lobbying Washington to be excluded from the tariffs, arguing that their national energy security depends on diversified sources. Whether those exemptions will be granted, and how consistently, is anyone's guess. Meanwhile, analysts are split on what happens next. Some say this could be the beginning of a sustained climb in oil prices, especially if supply continues to be disrupted. Others believe the pressure from higher prices and slower global demand could balance each other out, keeping prices from rising too steeply. Priyanka Sachdeva, a market analyst at Philip Nova, said that the current rise in oil prices is likely temporary. While tighter supply has led to this spike, the broader economic impact of Trump's tariffs could keep a lid on future gains. In other words, if the global economy slows because of trade barriers, people and businesses may use less fuel, which could eventually bring prices down again. But in the short term, what we're seeing is a market trying to adjust to a new set of rules that are changing quickly and often without much warning. Energy traders, oil producers, governments, and consumers are all trying to figure out what comes next. And it's not just about fuel prices at the pump. Higher oil prices affect everything from shipping and travel to food production and retail. When oil becomes more expensive, it can lead to higher costs across the board, squeezing both consumers and businesses. Ultimately, Trump's latest move adds another layer of complexity to a global oil market already shaped by tight supply chains, regional conflicts, and post-pandemic recovery efforts. The decision to tie tariffs directly to oil trade marks a shift in how the U.S. is using economic pressure, and the rest of the world is watching closely. In Canada, the economic consequences of new U.S. tariffs are already starting to show. What began as a political move from the White House is now being felt in real ways by Canadian workers, families, and communities, especially in the country's steel and aluminium sectors. So far, around 200 Canadian workers have already been laid off, mostly from companies directly tied to the steel and aluminium industries. Union leaders are warning that this is just the beginning. With more tariffs expected to go into full effect on April 2nd, some fear that tens of thousands of workers could be affected. The United Steelworkers Union, North America's largest private sector union, represents over 225,000 workers in Canada alone. Its national director, Marty Warren, says the union has been hearing from members across the country about job losses, hiring freezes, and production slowdowns. He described the situation as a growing crisis that could soon become a tidal wave. Among the companies already impacted is Canada Metal Processing Group. In February, even before the tariffs officially took effect, the company announced that it would be reducing its workforce by 140 employees. A company spokesperson confirmed the decision was directly related to concerns about incoming tariffs from the United States. Those fears have since become reality. The cuts at Canada Metal Processing Group are a mix of permanent and temporary layoffs early retirements, and reductions in working hours through a work-sharing program. The company has also frozen all hiring for the foreseeable future, which is another sign of just how serious the situation is becoming. Ontario-based Algoma Steel, another major player in Canada's steel industry, has also confirmed layoffs. According to CEO Michael Garcia, around 20 workers have already been let go, with more potentially on the way if the company cannot secure more Canadian buyers to make up for lost American orders. The human impact of all this is already visible. Take the example of Scott Noseworthy, who has worked for 4 years as a shredder operator at the Ivaco plant run by Canada Metal Processing Group. Workers like Scott were given advance notice about possible layoffs more than a month ago, but many had still hoped the tariffs would be avoided or delayed. When the news became official, operations at the plant ground to a halt. Now, Scott is back at work temporarily, focusing on maintenance and cleanup. But beyond this short-term task, he says the future is unclear. For people like Scott, who has a 2-year-old daughter at home, the instability is difficult. He describes the situation as hectic, saying there's no way to predict from one week to the next whether he'll have work, and he's far from alone. As the situation unfolds, many workers are looking to the government for support. Canada's federal government has responded with a series of emergency measures aimed at softening the blow. Just days before calling a federal election, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that workers would be given earlier access to employment insurance benefits. There's also a multi-billion-dollar aid program now in place to support affected businesses. It includes a work-sharing initiative that allows employees to collect partial unemployment benefits while working reduced hours, a measure that's already being used in some companies. But critics say these steps might not be enough. Advocates and economists alike are calling for a deeper overhaul of the employment insurance system. At the moment, the system leaves many part-time and non-traditional workers without support. There's also concern that benefits don't last long enough or pay enough to help people get back on their feet. One of the proposals being floated is the introduction of a pilot program that would raise the minimum weekly payment for those receiving benefits and extend how long people can claim them. Economists like Armin Yalnizyan, who holds a fellowship focused on the future of work, believe changes like this are both feasible and necessary, especially during an election campaign when Parliament isn't sitting and urgent action can be taken more easily. But even with these changes, there's a broader issue at play: uncertainty. Business owners, union leaders, and government officials all agree that the unpredictable nature of U.S. trade policy is part of the problem. When companies can't see clearly what lies ahead, when they're unsure which products will be targeted next, or how long tariffs will stay in place, they're much less likely to invest, hire, or expand. Dina Ladd, executive director of the Workers' Action Center, says her organization has already started hearing from workers who are being laid off by smaller subcontractors in the import-export sector. These are the kinds of companies that may not make headlines but are vital to the wider economy. She explains that while the headlines often focus on steel mills and large employers, the fallout is more widespread and affects hundreds of small businesses and thousands of working families. She points to the confusion and lack of clear information as one of the most damaging aspects of the situation. When companies don't know how tariffs are going to be applied, or whether exceptions will be made, they often respond by cutting costs, and unfortunately, that usually starts with cutting jobs. What's especially difficult for many in the industry is that these disruptions come at a time when demand for steel and aluminum was relatively stable. The sectors were not in crisis before the tariffs. Many plants were running efficiently, with steady output and a secure place in the North American supply chain. The new tariffs have introduced volatility where there previously was balance. Trump's broader trade policy is aimed at encouraging more manufacturing inside the United States, reducing America's trade deficits and protecting domestic producers from what he calls unfair competition. But the way these policies are being rolled out is creating side effects, some of which are being felt in neighboring countries like Canada. It's also worth noting that the US, Canada, and Mexico all signed the USMCA trade agreement during Trump's first term. That deal was meant to provide more stability and predictability across the region. But now, some products that fall under the USMCA are being hit with new tariffs anyway, creating confusion over what's protected and what isn't. In the meantime, affected workers and businesses in Canada are left trying to adapt. Some companies are exploring new markets within Canada, while others are looking at alternative export destinations. But replacing a trade relationship as large and important as the one Canada has with the US isn't easy, and it certainly won't happen overnight. If you've recently picked up a bottle of tequila or whiskey and noticed the price creeping up, you're not imagining it. The current trade tensions between the United States, Canada, and Mexico are starting to have a real impact on products that many people enjoy, including distilled spirits like tequila, whiskey, and liqueurs. And it's not just about paying a bit more at the checkout. There's a much bigger economic story unfolding behind the scenes. It's easy to overlook the business side of a bottle of tequila or a Canadian whiskey, but the numbers tell a very clear story. In 2024, the U.S. imported nearly $12 billion worth of distilled spirits. Almost half of that came from just two countries, Mexico and Canada. These are not just trading partners, they're vital suppliers in the American spirits market. Tequila, in particular, stands out. Between the year 2000 and 2024, U.S. imports of tequila rose by more than 1,400%, from around $350 million to over $5.4 billion. Today, tequila accounts for 45% of all imported spirits in the United States. To put it simply, almost all tequila consumed in the U.S., about 99%, is imported from Mexico. That makes Mexico not just a supplier, but the dominant source for this hugely popular product. Whiskey and liqueurs from Canada also play a big role in the U.S. market. While not as dramatic as tequila's rise, imports of Canadian spirits have remained steady over the past 2 decades, usually making up between 4 and 6% of all distilled spirits brought into the country. Now, with the introduction of a 25% import tariff on spirits from these countries, the industry is bracing for significant disruption. According to research by agricultural economist Andrew Muhammad from the University of Tennessee, these tariffs could result in over $1 billion in lost trade. Tequila alone could see an $810 million drop in U.S. imports. The math here is important. While the government might gain some revenue from the tariffs, Muhammad estimates about $910 million from tequila imports alone. The total loss in trade is even higher. That's because demand for alcohol is what economists call inelastic. People still buy it, even when prices go up. But they may buy a little less, or shift to cheaper alternatives, and that change adds up quickly across a market worth billions. It's also important to understand that tariffs don't just hit the producers in Mexico or Canada, they affect everyone in the supply chain. Importers, distributors, wholesalers, retailers, bars, restaurants, and of course consumers all feel the impact. The higher costs caused by tariffs often get passed down the line. So while it might start as a 25% tax on an imported product, it ends up influencing prices at bars and liquor stores across the U.S. And it doesn't stop with tequila and whiskey. Even products that aren't directly subject to the tariffs, like vodka from other countries, could be affected. That's because the added costs and logistical pressures on importers can lead to an overall reduction in how much is brought in. When importers are dealing with sudden price hikes and confusing trade rules, they tend to play it safe, cutting back on shipments across the board. This is what economists call trade destruction, where the uncertainty and added costs of tariffs reduce the overall volume of international trade. Another layer to this issue is how it fits into the wider debate about agricultural trade. Spirits like tequila and whiskey are classified as agricultural products, which means they're counted as part of the United States agricultural trade balance. Since the U.S. imports far more spirits than it exports, by about 5 times the value, these imports contribute to the agricultural trade deficit. Some policymakers see that as a problem, but others argue it's not that simple. imports of spirits aren't just about filling shelves. They support a much broader economic ecosystem. American companies involved in marketing, logistics, hospitality, and retail all benefit from having a wide range of popular imported drinks. When people buy tequila at a bar or a bottle of Canadian whiskey from the store, they're also supporting local jobs and businesses in the U.S. Reducing these imports doesn't necessarily mean more American production. It often just means fewer options and higher prices. The Trump administration has defended its use of tariffs as a way to protect American industries and generate revenue. The White House has claimed that tariffs were a key reason for economic growth, job creation, and investment during Trump's first term, and that they'll continue to be effective in his second. But many experts disagree. Andrew Mohammed's research, published in the peer-reviewed journal Agribusiness and summarized in a policy brief, suggests that the economic costs of the tariffs may actually outweigh the gains. Yes, the government collects revenue from the duties, but that income comes at the expense of higher prices, reduced trade, and disruptions across industries. His analysis shows that when you factor in all the losses, including drops in whiskey imports and the ripple effect on other products, the overall impact is negative. There's also the risk of retaliation. Canada has already responded with counter tariffs on a wide range of U.S. goods, and while Mexico has so far held off, that could change. Retaliatory tariffs often target American agricultural exports, like corn, pork, or dairy. This kind of tit-for-tat trade war ends up hurting both sides. It's also worth noting that the U.S., Canada, and Mexico are all part of the USMCA trade agreement, which was signed during Trump's first term. That deal was designed to modernize and stabilize trade between the three nations, making it easier and more predictable to do business across borders. But the current wave of tariffs is testing that agreement, and many business owners are confused about which products are actually protected under the deal and which are now facing new duties. For businesses in the alcohol industry, this is a challenging moment. Importers are trying to navigate complex regulations, uncertain timelines, and sudden changes in costs. Retailers are deciding whether to absorb the price hikes or pass them on to customers. And consumers are left wondering why their favorite bottle now costs a few dollars more. In the long run, the effects of these tariffs could go beyond just the drinks market. They're part of a broader shift toward protectionist trade policies that are changing how goods move around the world. Whether that shift ultimately helps or hurts the U.S. economy is still up for debate. But in the short term, the impact on the distilled spirits industry is clear and significant. The quarterly survey, carried out by Duke University along with the Federal Reserve Banks of Richmond and Atlanta, shows a sharp decline in economic optimism among chief financial officers. These are the people making decisions about where to invest, who to hire, and how to grow. And right now, many of them are hitting pause. What's driving this hesitation is not just the tariffs themselves, but the unpredictability surrounding them. Companies aren't sure which products might be targeted next, how high the tariffs will go, or how long they'll stay in place. For many business leaders, this uncertainty has created what they describe as a deer-in-headlights moment, forcing them to slow down hiring and reduce capital spending until the picture becomes clearer. The data is striking. About 25% of CFOs surveyed said they've cut back on hiring plans, while another 25% reported trimming capital investment. Only a very small percentage, just 6%, said they've actually increased hiring due to current trade policy. That tells a clear story. The majority of businesses are either holding steady or scaling back, not expanding. John Graham, a finance professor at Duke's Fuqua School of Business, explained it simply. In the short term, tariffs are a big risk. They're now the #1 concern for CFOs, rising sharply from 9th place in the final quarter of last year. The jump is the largest seen since the survey began asking this question more than 20 years ago. The White House, for its part, maintains that tariffs are part of a larger plan to protect American industries and boost domestic production. A spokesperson said that Trump's economic agenda has already brought trillions of dollars in investment to the U.S., and that his use of tariffs in his first term led to job growth and higher wages without increasing inflation. The administration believes similar outcomes are possible this time around. But not everyone agrees with that view. For business owners like Ryan Messenger, the CEO of First Rate Blinds in North Carolina, the reality has been very different. Messenger, who voted for Trump in the 2024 election after supporting Joe Biden in 2020, says he's now grappling with a 20% cost increase on some of the products his company imports from Mexico. To stay afloat, his company has to absorb some of that cost and pass the rest on to customers, meaning higher prices for everyday buyers. He said the uncertainty is overwhelming, especially when it's unclear which products are temporarily exempt from tariffs due to agreements like the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. Some suppliers have even started raising their prices in anticipation of new duties, leaving companies like his scrambling. The concern doesn't stop with small businesses. Larger firms involved in construction, manufacturing, and consumer goods are also feeling the impact. One commercial builder told researchers that tariffs were a major concern because they could push up the price of imported raw materials, making it harder to stay competitive. Consumer confidence is also taking a hit. A separate report from the Conference Board found that public confidence in the economy has dropped to its lowest level since January 2021. While confidence doesn't always translate directly into economic slowdown, it can influence spending habits. If people start worrying about the future, they tend to hold off on big purchases, and that hesitation can ripple through the economy. Former Trump advisor Stephen Moore said that the problem is not just the tariffs themselves, but how they're being communicated. He believes that uncertainty and mixed signals from policymakers are what's causing businesses and consumers to pull back. He added that if people stop spending, the real economy will start to suffer, and that's the real danger. Moore also offered some political advice to Republicans. Stop talking so much about tariffs and focus instead on passing tax cuts. His concern is that the prolonged focus on trade battles could cause unnecessary harm to the economy and overshadow other parts of the administration's agenda. As the April 2nd deadline for more tariffs approaches, many companies are in wait-and-see mode. Some are preparing contingency plans, while others are simply hoping that policy clarity will come soon. But for now, what's clear is that tariffs, once seen as just one tool in trade negotiations, have become a central issue affecting job growth, investment, and the overall mood in corporate America. Whether these worries will translate into lasting economic damage remains to be seen. But in the short term, the hesitation from businesses and the concern from consumers are real. And that makes tariffs not just a policy tool, but a powerful force shaping the direction of the U.S. economy in 2025.